Welcome back to City and State TV. I'm Gerson Borrero. We should be conducting this in español, but we're not going to scare all of you, because I know you're, limited by, you're not bilingual, you're monolingual. So Mickey Meléndez just got back from Cuba. Mickey, welcome back to New York State, New York City. Mickey is one of the organizers. It's a co-venture of really making this trip. You took 40 people, you left from New York, you went to Cuba, you spent a week there. We interviewed 8 of you, including yourself, as one of the co-organizers with Cynthia, who happens to be the better half of your life, a better 2/3 in your life.
Absolutely.
And Cynthia, actually, you put together this group. We went to an orientation that you allowed us to sit in, and then we interviewed 8 of you. You explained what the purpose of the trip was. It's online. If you haven't seen that particular interview, we'll link it into this one. You got back. How is Cuba? What did you find in Cuba? And you were there, actually, during Séptima Cumbre de las Américas in Panama.
Yeah.
A major event. Tell us about the trip. How did it go?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here again, and I just want to, just say that and extend that to City and State. We had a phenomenal time. It was a particularly historic trip for a lot of reasons. And yeah, we were there during the 7th summit of the OAS. And when we got back, we went from Tuesday to Tuesday, so we just got back this past Tuesday. It took me 2 days to recover. This is my first day out of my house. In any case.
And then today's being Friday. So
Today's Friday, yeah. So we get back and we put the news on, and to our surprise, what people are reporting here in the United States is something that we saw on Cuba TV 3 days ago. So we just turned the TV off.
What is that?
Well, the handshake, with Raul, and that they were off the terrorist list.
Rehashing.
Yeah, the people in Cuba knew that Saturday and Friday on Cuban TV, because when we go to the hotel, we put
Right.
Cuban TV just to see. So for us, it was old news, and we really figured out that, people in this country, at least, and perhaps in other areas as well, but at least in terms of Cuba, you're getting news like 3 days old. People in Cuba get the information 3 days before you do here. So that was a nice surprise.
So you're trying to say that there is no limitation in access to actual information, as is perceived here, that there's a control by the government and filtering or sanitizing or even censoring some of the stuff there. You were getting it real live time
Right.
from Cumbre de las Américas, and you were aware of the historic event between President Obama and President Castro.
Absolutely.
What is the reaction of, maybe not in the hotels, but as you went out on the street, with regards to what Cubans' life is in Cuba? Is there a perception or is there a reality that we think, well, things are changing, the embargo is going to be lifted, normalization of relationships is going to happen, and we're like on a, we live on an actual speed that I don't think is a reality in Cuba. I've never visited Cuba. I don't know how it is. You've been going there for over 30 years on a yearly basis. What is the reality to the average Cuban? What does this all mean?
Nothing has changed in Cuba. What you find is perhaps a change in attitude, and I would identify it as people are optimistically cautious, and that's the extent of it. Nothing has changed. Prices haven't changed. Nothing about the country has changed. They understand that things are about to change and they could change, but there's still a lot of hurdles, to go by. I mean, the terrorist list is certainly one of them. Guantanamo is going to be another one because they're in a position to now, negotiate. And they're in a good position to negotiate. It's kind of like, David beat Goliath again. David beat Goliath, during the revolution. David beat Goliath, and it was yesterday the anniversary of the Bay of Pigs, and David beat Goliath with the release of the Cuban Five. So they're in a really good position to negotiate a lot of the things that they've not been able to do or have for the past 50, 60 years.
You got a chance to actually talk to some of Cuban officials and some ex-Cuban officials like Ricardo Alarcón. I thank you, Cynthia, for sending me some of the pictures, almost 300 pictures, which we'll tap into and show. One of them was with Ricardo Alarcón, Ricardo Alarcón was president of the National Assembly of the Cuban government. They do have a structure, and he, in essence, as the president of that. He ran the Cuban government, which is, as I understand it, the way the Cuban government is set up. Maybe a communist government, but there is representation. It may be a one-party system, but there's representation from every provincia, if you will, right? And so that's there. So Ricardo Alarcón has some of the photos. You'll see it with Mickey. He had a nice cigar, which someday I'll go and smoke a cigar in Cuba. But the reality then with the officials is that cautiously optimistic. What does it mean in terms of the embargo? The trade, the fact that people, do they see it on an economic sense of betterment of their daily lives? Does they see as additional income? There's talk about the entrepreneur spirit that is being instilled by the government, not looking at structures or conglomerates or, as we know, corporations here, but rather the individual. I know that you had some of the people that you took, the group, the 40 people, you take them to where these merchants or people, entrepreneurs actually exchange with them or buy, purchase, whatever it is, souvenirs. With regards to the perception of what that lifting of the embargo could be, was there any sense of that they're looking forward to that more than anything else? Or is it just the overall opening to an otherwise, the friendliness of the Cuban people with the American people, the US citizens, rather than the government? I'm trying to get my grasp. I mean, it's too much, and I know that, but.
Yeah, look, the attitude about, the friendship with the American people, I mean, they've always made, and the organization that we were invited with is the Friendship Organization, ICAP, Instituto Cubano de Amistad con el Pueblo. And they've always made a distinction.
You sounded like a Cuban when you
said
that.
And that was, that's the other half of me, right? And that's one of the organizations they put together, shortly after the revolution, to make a distinction, particularly in the United States, that although they have a problem with the United States government, they do not have a problem with the American people, and they wanted to open those bridges between people, bridges people to people, kind of thing. So, and look, the Cuban, I mean, there is this thinking that things are going to get better, but Cuba today and Cubans today in Cuba are still concerned with their day-to-day lives and their day-to-day needs and the shortages that continue to happen in the marketplace. So that's their reality. I mean, this other piece is not a reality yet for them. It's a hope, and it's an optimistic hope, but it's also they're very cautious. They don't have any reason why to trust the United States for the history, that's there. I mean, even the fact that Cuba. It was the first time that Cuba was attending there. This happened because
that being la Cumbre de las Americas,
right? The
seventh
summit.
Yeah, the U.S. said invite them, and then that's right.
Yeah, that's not true.
It's not true.
No, what happened in 2012 was that unanimously, and even the two countries aligned with the United States, which was Colombia and Mexico, unanimously said that they will not attend any more of those. So, the United States was actually, if this was going to continue, and people should also go into the history of the OSA. I mean, the OSA has its roots in Simón Bolívar in 1820 when he tried to do these federations and, times in history during that time. The one that we recognize now as the one that's there was done in 1948, and it was done with Roosevelt and the Secretary of State, George Marshall, and it was basically an anti-communist organization that was put together in 1948. But it has a long history of the Americas coming together. And I think, to quote the Ecuadorian president, Rafael Correa, he says that, because of the strength and because of the unity that Latin America and the Americas are now demonstrating, he says that this is the second revolution and probably the true liberation of Latin America.
But you do realize that here in the U.S., some media outlets
Absolutely.
has said that it was because the USA, United States of America, that they said invite them, and that's why it happened, and that's not true.
No, just the history's there, and the documentation.
But for this particular cumbre, that wasn't true.
No.
Okay.
No. Latin American governments said 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we're not doing this again if Cuba's not at the table. Period.
All right, let's get to President Obama before we get to what New Yorkers, come Monday. This Monday, I think they leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. By the time this rolls out, either we'll see. New York State Governor Andrew Mark Cuomo will be leading a delegation, a trade delegation, to see the possibilities of trading with Cuba. The trip is going to be less than 48 hours. before I...
The entire trip is less than 48?
Yes,
They're going to Cuba for 48 hours.
for a trade is why...
You mean they're just going into Cuba for 2 days and that's it and coming back?
That's what the trip is planned.
Dumb.
Really?
I mean, how could you go to Cuba, I mean, you know, and just go for that amount of time? I mean, they're going to be in meetings all the time. They're not going to see the people. They're not going to travel. They're not going to go to the beach. They're not going to go to sit at the swimming pool. They ain't going to have no mojitos in the bar. There's no time for anything in 2 days.
There is... Okay, so you say this is a complete waste. So let me ask you this. Will this feed... You're just feeding into the suspicion or the theory of some of us. I have thought about this, that this is just a political photo opportunity for Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, if he's doing that, that's a great, yeah, you can do a photo op in 2 days, you know. But to have, you know, really substantial conversation, to be able to talk to people, to be able to meet, you know, his counterpart, at least in Havana province, you know, what, there's no interest to interact with people. You know?
Well, in his defense, and I'm not his publicist or part of his communication.
And I don't mean to attack him in any way. I just think that, you know,
But you just said it was dumb that he.
I said the trip. I said the trip.
The trip is dumb.
48-hour trip to Cuba by anybody, you know, is dumb. Especially you know, an elected political official.
Well, he has said that it's only a trade trip. It has nothing to do with trade, nothing to do with the politics. He doesn't care what it is that's happening in the communist country. He doesn't care about freedom of speech or political prisoners and the regular things that most Americans, you know, denounce. He's just saying, no, I want to see if I can sell them yogurt and sell them apples. That's all he's saying. So even then, the trip is a waste of time.
You know, I think that, you know, first of all, any elected official from the United States that goes to Cuba, you know, Cuba's very welcoming. You know, and I think more people and more elected officials should go to Cuba. And they're very welcoming because it begins to break down, if you allow yourself to see it, it begins to break down a lot of the stereotypes. And I don't care, you know, who you are, you know, and if you haven't been to Cuba in 40 or 50 years, you go in with some prejudices, you know.
Mickey Meléndez, let me just stop for a minute here because you were not only in Cuba, you had Ricardo Alarcón in an activity, as I understand it, in Casa Puerto Rico, right?
Right. The equivalent to a Puerto Rican embassy.
Equivalent to a Puerto Rican embassy,
right.
which
it's
doesn't
the only
exist
in the world.
In the
right.
world. So Ricardo Alarcón was the president of the National Assembly of Cuba. He is still an active member of the Communist Party.
And
right?
the Politburo as well.
The Politburo.
Right. And the governing
Was there
body.
any conversation in which you and Ricardo Alarcón actually spoke about Andrew Cuomo or this coming trip?
You know, it was very brief. You know, he said, you know, I told him, you know, Andrew Cuomo is coming. You know, we were the advance team, you know, for Andrew Cuomo.
You were kidding around with it,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
Right.
And he says, yeah, you know, we're ready to talk to anybody who comes here. And that was basically it.
And by the way, when you say the advanced team, your group included healthcare professionals, doctors, teachers, cultural people, artists. So you have a mix of people. So that was the extent with Ricardo. Did you speak to anyone else? I know that you also had 3 or 4 of the 5 freed political prisoners from Cuba, those that were accused of being spies, and they came to the reception. Was there any conversation about New York or the trade agreement or Andrew Cuomo?
No.
Do Cubans know who Andrew Cuomo is?
They know the governor of New York is coming to visit. You know, and for them, you know, they think that it's going to be a visit because, again, a visit, I don't think that 2 days is a visit. You know, I think that 2 days is you know, dropping yourself in there, you're there for 48 hours and you leave. So when I'm almost sure, and I wish I would have known this before, they think that he's coming for a week, the way everybody normally comes, and they do the rounds, and they speak to the people they need to speak to, and they go see the art museum, which is one of the state art museums of the world, with art going back to the 12th and 14th century that they were able to recover.
Why is that important? In other words, why would it be important? Let's go so that it's not lost in the translation. Mm-hmm. There is an assumption here in the way that that Americans, that we conduct business, our government, that is not a reality for Cubans. So why do they see this as a un viajecito, para decir hello.
Yeah, that's basically it. You know, there's probably going to be, and there should be, and it depends on either the success or the failure of this trip, that something gets set up so that people can go there for a longer period of time to really talk and negotiate what the logistics are. You cannot do that within 48 hours, and it's 48 hours. This is not counting sleeping and eating. So what are you talking about? If they've put in a full day of work, 16 hours of meetings, for what? To establish what? They're not in the process, and they're not in the, and you know, the other thing is, I mean, you know, it depends also in terms of, you know, Cuomo's latitude. You know, can he just go in there and sell apples from upstate New York to, you know, to them without the State Department being involved? You know, the embargo is not lifted. The embargo is not going to be lifted again until they get through these negotiations. You know, and yeah, the terrorist list was one, and it took them 4 meetings to get to that one after December 17th.
We're gonna pause. We're gonna pause for a minute here. We're gonna go to pause because this is gonna be part one. I'm gonna go into part two. We're talking to Mickey Meléndez, who headed a group of 40 New Yorkers who went to Cuba, who spent a week there, and who has been going to Cuba for over 30 years. In the past 5 years, you have actually taken delegations of people that include teachers, professors, professionals in different fields, union members, organizers, and quite revealing what we just heard from Mickey Meléndez and his perception of what our governor, New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo, is doing in 48 hours. We'll be right back at City and State TV. I'm Gerson Borrero. We're going to continue with Mickey Meléndez in part two.